everyone. Welcome to Go Local Live. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us this sunny Tuesday afternoon for kicking off with news and politics as we usually do with Professor of Political Science Jennifer Lawless down at the University of Virginia. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today.
Of course.
So want to kick off with a very interesting last couple of days. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi making some comments both geared specifically towards AOC, and the question of the future of the Democrat Party kind of hangs in the balance. 60 Minutes over the weekend, Pelosi was asked about AOC's block, if you will, said, "That's only 5 people," was shot back, "Well, it seems more than that," and Nancy said she's a progressive. And then making some comments specifically towards Democratic districts that anyone, a glass of water with a D next to their name, could have won, which belies the primary that led to that as well. But let's talk a little bit about this. Pelosi and AOC. Pelosi seemed to try to keep her at a close distance, but now after this weekend, it seems like the gloves are off.
Right, and that's because we're heading into the 2020 elections. Even if Nancy Pelosi and AOC and her 4 colleagues who support her agenda entirely are quite similar when it comes to 99% of the issues, the reality is that they're quite different when it comes to rhetoric. And Nancy Pelosi is well aware of the fact that any ammunition that she can give Donald Trump or the Republicans to say things like Democrats want to tax you at 70%, or Democrats are in favor of socialism, or Democrats want to know why we're not more like Finland, are a problem. And so even if on policy they're actually not that different, it's important for Nancy Pelosi to distance herself and to distance the party as a whole from what she's going to try to characterize as a fringe element. Otherwise, Donald Trump winds up having his talking points and the ads are basically written for him.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that response from the speaker, the wide-eyed, "I'm a progressive." Would you characterize Pelosi as progressive?
I would. She's certainly a progressive in terms of substance. She's less progressive in terms of style. And I think we've gotten to the point where we tend to conflate those two things. But just because you are willing to work within the establishment, just because you have a leadership position, and as a result, you have to go to the White House or you have to engage with Mitch McConnell, does not mean that you don't hold very progressive views. And indeed, her district in San Francisco is one of the most progressive across the country. So notions that she is sort of veering away from the progressive bandwagon are just silly. She just has a more conservative with a very small c tone to how she's delivering her message.
And let's talk a little bit about that 2020 outlook. AOC has made some comments that Biden, I believe, is akin to sort of being in the past, and she's looking towards the future. What does Biden Watch 2020 hold?
I think right now it looks like he is a little bit down in the polls, which suggests that he's got to get into this race very, very soon if he's going to make it a contest. People need to know what's going on. People are watching, and I think they are eager to see whether he has the energy and the enthusiasm and the ability to respond to the kinds of criticisms that he's been enduring as of late. The longer he waits to get in, the easier it is for people to find alternative candidates. As far as AOC's comments about Biden, I think there's something important that Democrats have to remember here, which is that it's one thing to say that we need fresh faces and new blood in the United States Congress. That's generally true. And we saw that the American people were clamoring for that in 2018, both in primaries and in general elections. When it comes to the presidency, though, we've actually seen what no experience can get us. And that's not to suggest that the Democrats would put in somebody like Donald Trump. All of the Democrats, even those that don't have a lot of electoral experience, have some. But to say that Biden is just sort of hearkening back to the past, I think obscures a lot of the challenges that America is facing right now and a lot of the situations that Donald Trump and people who haven't been embedded in Washington have gotten us into.
And speaking of who could be a potential challenger to Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders. The big talk this week, of course, is the Fox Town Hall, in which they went to the audience for the reaction to Sanders' Medicare for All, and he got a pretty warm response.
He did. It started out with a question where people were asked whether they pay for private health insurance, and more than half the audience said that they did. And so I think the expectation when they then went to the audience and said, well, would you be willing to trade that in for Medicare for All? And about half the audience said yes, came as some sort of a shock. The one thing I would note is that it's a lot easier to garner support for those kinds of statements when you're not informing people that they might have to pay for those programs. So if people were told that actually their tax money might go up, I'm not sure that we would have the same level of enthusiasm.
I hear some enthusiasm for Medicare for all, perhaps, behind you there, Dowd.
Indeed, I'm sorry.
It is all good. Let's talk a little bit about that composition of the town hall. Who does Fox News bring into that? Is it a self-selecting audience that knew Sanders was there and wanted to see him? I mean, let's talk, is it like polling? I mean, who's the representative crowd that's there in attendance?
It's difficult to know, right? Because some people are there because they want to support Sanders. Others are there because they want to make sure that they're doing everything they possibly can to ensure that he doesn't get support. And so we can never really know. The important thing is that even in this environment, it was possible to generate a willingness among people who currently have private health insurance to be open to the idea of Medicare for all, and that's a huge, huge victory for Sanders.
As you said, though, again, not getting necessarily into the particulars. And not getting into the particulars, let's go with President Donald Trump's recent remarks about sanctuary cities and bringing undocumented immigrants to them. We've seen a lot of feedback from folks saying that that just could not possibly even be feasible.
I mean, it's completely ridiculous. The notion that he's going to punish sanctuary cities by dumping immigrants into them is just in and of itself offensive. But then on top of that, the logistics are impossible. So I just think it's definitely an opportunity for Trump to highlight the fact that he is against sanctuary cities, he's against immigration, he's against anybody that is interested in figuring out how to allow the United States to be a beacon of welcoming people and still secure our borders. And it's just the kind of rhetoric that creates division. It's completely par for the course, and it's his way of demonstrating that he's well aware that the 2020 campaign has taken off as well.
And then all eyes Thursday, the expected release of the Mueller report, redacted. Any reason for the president to be nervous?
Yes. I think we don't know how much of it is going to be redacted. So for every word that is not redacted, the president should be nervous. For every word that is redacted, the president should be relatively happy. I saw Rudy Giuliani say that he thinks 400 pages is too long, 35 might be right. It depends what those 35 are. 4 could be right if the words are damning enough. The reason the president should be nervous, though, is because he has a Congress that is dead set on, a House anyway, making sure that they take very seriously their investigative authority. And so if there is anything in that report that suggests that although there was not evidence of collusion or a crime that Donald Trump could be charged with right now because he's a sitting president, it does not mean that the House is not going to move forward and investigate. And we've seen that as more and more investigations take place, more and more indictments are issued and more people go to prison. So, I don't think that Donald Trump should be resting on his laurels here. Probably as far as the politics are concerned, he wins on that front.
So all eyes again, Thursday, expected release of the Mueller report, redacted. In addition to that, what are we keeping an eye on in the coming week ahead?
So obviously, whether Joe Biden makes a decision to enter the race or not. The other thing is we're beginning to see rumblings about other people that are thinking about running for hotly contested races. I just saw today that Roy Moore, for example, is at the head of the Republican field for the primary, once again for the Alabama Senate seat. These are the kinds of candidates who Democrats would love to get into the race and who Republicans want to distance themselves from. Another example, Todd Akin, who had lost his Senate seat or who tried to defeat Claire McCaskill and lost because he had said that, there's such thing as legitimate rape, was actually seen as one of Steve King's largest donors the last time around. So these sort of Republican names that can cause a big problem for the Republican Party, I would expect are going to continue to garner quite a bit of attention as we head into the 2020 election cycle.
So if they, again, are such lightning rods, such third rails, if you will, how did they manipulate that? How do they work within the confines of their own party structure if, as you said, the Democrats are salivating for them to consider another run?
Well, a lot of it, I think, comes down to the overall party's reputation and whether they actually care. We see that when Donald Trump has an ability to threaten people and say, if you don't support me or if you don't support my brand of republicanism, you're going to be out. that's contingent on these people actually holding vulnerable seats. And so his threats worked a little bit the last time around because people like Bob Corker or Jeff Flake decided that it wasn't worth it and they didn't seek re-election. This time around, there are not a lot of Republicans holding seats that the Democrats could potentially take over. By the same token, there are not a lot of Democrats who are in very vulnerable seats either. So it might be that it's all talk and it just doesn't matter. But it doesn't help it doesn't help the Republicans in that handful of districts where, it's possible that either a Democrat or a Republican could ultimately hold the seat.
Well, plenty to watch moving forward. Of course, again this Thursday, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to talk with you before next week. But Jennifer Lawless, as always, thank you for tuning in to Go Local Live. We'll talk with you soon.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. We're going to let Professor of Political Science Jennifer Lawless at UVA go, and we're going to be right back here to get a little more local on Go Local Live.